everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got an epic show ahead, but just remember, if any of you have experiences you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can either email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com or head over to paranormalportal.net and scroll down and find the button that says Interview Me, and that'll allow you to look at a calendar of possible times and dates and find a date that works for you. Love to hear your stories, so definitely get in touch with me. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. And before we get started, a quick word from our new sponsor.
Here at the Paranormal Portal, we have built a beautiful podcast. Nobody thought it could be done, but we did it. Unlike Anthony Roscoe Merkel and his Confessionals podcast, our merchandise doesn't come from China. We make everything here in America. We are proud to introduce our new sponsor, AOL, a great internet service provider, a beautiful corporation. In 1984, AOL was the largest internet provider in the United States. Normally $6.99 a month, but with our promo code, Tony Merkel Stinks, you will experience amazing internet speeds, great customer service from an amazing company. With our promo code, Tony Merkel Stinks, you will save 30% off the normal price. Won't you come on down and use your promo code to support the Paranormal Portal?
For the podcast, I'm going to do several of them, but I just finished up one today. Oh no, what the hell's going on? Unable to connect. What is going on? What is going on? Oh no. I want to thank AOL for supporting what I do. Hey look, I am saving money. Tony Merkel Stinks. Thanks so much, AOL. Special thanks to Wes Germer of Sasquatch Chronicles for that last clip. That just made my day. All right, guys, let's get on to the show.
This looks extraordinarily bad.
They linger in a perpetual dream state, a nightmare from which they cannot wake.
I can't see you, Mommy! Where are you?
I've never sensed anything like it. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. They're attracted to the one thing about her that's different from themselves. Her life force. It is very strong. It gives off its own illumination. It is a light that implies life and memory of love and home and earthly pleasures. Something they desperately desire, but can't have anymore. Right now, she's the closest thing to that.
Poltergeists are usually associated with an individual. Hauntings seem to be connected with an area. A house, usually.
Poltergeist disturbances are of fairly short duration, perhaps a couple of months. Hauntings can go on for years.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal. This is our podcast where we dive into all of the strange and unusual that we can pack into a podcast. I thought we would try something a little different today. Generally speaking, I interview people largely on this show where I talk to both experiencers, researchers, authors, and other presences and personalities in the fields. And I've had an amazing journey doing this for many years now. And I really thought prior to doing the Paranormal Portal that this is something that should be pretty easy for me to do, because I'd been, exploring the paranormal as much as I could since I was pretty young. I've always been fascinated by the worlds of the unknown and strange and unusual, and having many experiences of my own, it's always been kind of a big part of my life. And my journey's been to try to understand what the hell's going on with this stuff. It's just such a strange and unusual part of our world. We've often been conditioned to think that reality is this box that we live in with absolute rules and absolute logic, that this is reality. It's unyielding, it's unbending. But then this strange stuff happens and kind of turns everything on its head. The rules get broken and the impossible happens right before people's eyes, and they're left in a state of confusion, shock, terror, fear, any number of emotions, even, sadness and uncertainty. So I've always been fascinated by this because I think that the world is much more mysterious and magical maybe than what we've been led to believe. And I think that a lot of this is what is represented in the paranormal. These things that are happening that aren't supposed to be able to happen, and yet they do. People experience them. They are oftentimes life-altering experiences. For those that haven't grown up with it, it's just like, oh my God, it's a paradigm shift. And so I thought it would be kind of interesting to, every once in a while on these podcasts, to dive into a topic and kind of explore possibilities about it. Now, first and foremost, I would encourage you to know that I don't have the answers, but I would also encourage you to remember that nobody does. Whatever this strange stuff of the paranormal is, it doesn't really lend itself to rigorous study. It doesn't lend itself to clinical conditions. The strange and unusual happens when it happens, how it happens, when it happens. It's not on a clock. It's not on a schedule. It just occurs because I think maybe it's the breadcrumbs, as I've said many times throughout the course of the show. Maybe this stuff is the breadcrumbs where we explore new ideas in reality, because we're presented with these new experiences that people just aren't conditioned for. So I thought we'd start diving into these topics. Today's topic is, what is a ghost? Now, for me, again, I thought, well, I knew the paranormal. I was ready to do shows, but my understanding has evolved so much since starting the Paranormal Portal until today, and I'm sure it'll continue to evolve as I continue to come to new understandings and realizations about all of this strange and unusual stuff. But one of the biggest things that has been transformed in my understanding and in my mind is the idea of ghosts. Ghosts is kind of a blanket term. It's just a term to describe encounters with these presences that, are largely unseen, mostly represented as some kind of energetic presence, but not a physical presence. There are manifestations where they can appear physical, or at least semi-physical, and they do seem to physically interact with things, I imagine through energetic means, but they do. And so we oftentimes regard ghosts as these formerly living people. They're ghosts. They were people, and now they're not alive in the traditional sense any longer, so they exist now on our plane as these energetic presences. But as I've learned and talked to so many people, it became apparent to me that this isn't just one phenomena. This is many different possible phenomena, but we acknowledge them as ghosts and hauntings. So I thought we would dive into what are ghosts. And I guess we'll just start there. So initially, I want to talk about traditional understandings of the ghost. So the term ghost is a blanket term to describe interactions with presences that we generally don't see, but experience in other ways. And those other ways could be sounds. They could be objects opening and closing doors, moving objects, could be presences, temperature shifts, that tingling sensation that a lot of people get when they're around that, a potential ghostly presence. There's so many ways that we seem to interact with what these ghosts are. It is very interesting because it's not like they just pop in and say, "Hey, I'm here." So generally they're non-physical or intangible. And while they're non-physical, they are noted to interact with physical matter and people directly. There's generally considered two types of hauntings, just for the understanding of what we're discussing here today. One type is regarded as residual, and generally speaking, those are events that are recorded perhaps by the environment itself, and will just periodically replay. They'll just be a person in a rocking chair. Now, one of the key takeaways of that is that if the presence doesn't seem to interact or acknowledge anybody else that is there in physical form, if they don't seem to look at people and acknowledge that they're there, make any indication that there's any direct interaction, then largely we consider those residual. They're just like watching a movie every once in a while. When you're watching a movie, the characters in the movie don't seem to recognize that you're there. They do their thing, and we watch them do their thing, and we can replay it. And that's kind of the same theory of what residual hauntings is. The other general type of haunting is an intelligent haunt, where it seems like there is an intelligent presence there. It will directly target or influence or interact in some manner with the people living there. It can sometimes be pets. It can be people, can be, objects, things like that when they're moved and they're interacting with their environment actively. Those are considered intelligence. And for the sake of this discussion, that's what we're focusing on, is these intelligent haunts or these intelligent spiritual presences that are around. So oftentimes, again, we think of ghosts as formerly living people. They were people. Now they're not in their physical form anymore, but they seem to be in this energetic state. But for some reason, they continue to linger here in our plane of existence. They don't seem to carry on or go on to whatever's next. I don't think that they, in many cases, can't. I think in many cases they choose not to for whatever reasons, and we don't truly understand what that is, though there's a lot of theories of why that could be, and we'll get into more of that a little bit. But the presence is often regarded as the result of some tragic event where these alleged people met their end in a horrific manner, such as through an accident, murder, war, disease, or through self-harm. So oftentimes we think that, well, they're here because there was so much trauma in however they passed, or sadness, or grief, or agony, or something, and that kept them adhered to this plane. And so those are a lot of the traditional beliefs. Also, most consider their presence the result of unfinished business, sadness, anguish, again, not even knowing they've passed in some cases from the physical plane. And most believe these presences are rooted in a location that was significant to them in their life, such as a family home or the site of their passings. And that can include just passing away in a location due to age or sickness, or even the location of a car crash or accident or self-harm or something else that makes that location very significant to their story. So those are, generally speaking, our basic understanding of what ghosts are. And I think it's fair enough in many cases, but I think there's more going on here. So the story of ghostly contacts and encounters permeates cultures and histories the world over. And while these manifestations may have regional characteristics, in one case, such as the female apparitions with long black hair that are often reported in Asiatic cultures. And think of like Samara from The Ring. That's a very Asian or Japanese idea of what, distraught spirits can look like. The consistency of ghost stories the world over does seem to demonstrate that it's part of our human experience. So what are ghosts? Interestingly enough, since this is a phenomenon that is global, it's not just regional, again, although there are very specific manifestations that seem to correspond to cultures. Again, the Samara-like figure is one of them, one of many. And there's several different cultures with various representations for what some of these distraught or unrested spirits will look like. But given that, there is a universality of ghostly experiences all over the globe. And that's also a significant point in other aspects of the paranormal, like cryptozoology. There's a Bigfoot legends all over the world. And so those are all really incredible considerations when discussing the validity of these experiences, because if it was just one region, or if it was just one belief system, or one religion, or something to that matter, then it might be easier to dismiss as just part of that group. But since it permeates all of these cultures and religions and regions, and gives it a sense of universality, that it really is an experience that's shared by human beings across the face of the earth. So I think that's a profound point, and a very powerful point as well. So what are ghosts? Well, honestly, nobody can be sure. And again, I want to reiterate that what I discuss throughout the course of this show are my own ideas. These are my own personal reflections and thoughts on the topic. It doesn't make me right. It doesn't make me an authority. It's just my personal musings as I try to dive into what are these phenomena, what is going on, and what are these experiences for? And that's a little bit about what we're going to dive into here. So what I would like to reiterate is that the points that I already mentioned with the general idea of what ghosts are, those are still accurate. And I do believe that they represent at least part of this phenomena as it happens. There are certainly many cases of people being visited by loved ones, or people that they knew in life, having experiences that are pretty unmistakable for potential visitations. There are plenty of researches that align with stories of trauma and such, and this presence is naming themselves as those same characters. So perhaps some of them are indeed these formerly living people that are somehow, or for some reason, still attached to this plane of existence. But is that all that's going on? And I don't think it is. I think there's many, many layers of what this means. While we use the term ghost to describe the strange encounters, it seems like there are several potential candidates for what is understood as a ghost. This is a list of my own conclusions up to this point. So bear with me as we go into this. But first, some ghosts are formerly living people. They may have any number of reasons to have stuck around, some willingly and some potentially unwillingly. But it can be that there was a sincere kind of love for family, or looking over the family and to be there with them as they go through their journey or any number of things. And we'll get a little more into this in a bit. Now, there's other things that are recognized as spiritual type entities that were never people. And those come up surprisingly enough quite a bit in these stories that I hear in the paranormal. One such classification is what's known as shadow people. What are shadow people? Well, they look like people, but only in the respects that they have a human-like silhouette, but they seem to be just darkness. Sometimes they're reported with red glowing eyes. Sometimes there's a hat man phenomena that's regarded as part of the shadow people often. And they can be regarded as very scary and unhealthy presences by some. Now, I would like to throw in this little tidbit of information because largely when you hear people talk about shadow people in the paranormal, they say, oh, those are bad. You got to get away from those. Sometimes you can't even get them out of a space. You might just have to move. And I don't know if that's necessarily true or not, but I know that there are several people in the field that would tell you that if you have shadow people, you've got to get out. I will say, though, that I've heard one other possible explanation for what these shadow people are. And actually, if this is true, it casts a whole new light on what shadow people are. And this is something that we covered quite a while ago on the Paranormal Portal, but it was a different take. Now, the source of this was actually Coast to Coast AM. I think it might even have been back in the Art Bell days, but there was a gentleman on there who was a Native American shaman, and I believe he was with the Cherokee tribe, and he talked about his training in going into shamanism and the things that he learned. Now, what he said, and I found this very, very profound, is that shadow people are not bad. In fact, they perform an incredibly vital role. According to him, it was true that they were attracted to the negative energy and they would be drawn to it and will inhabit a place with dark energy, but their presence wasn't to increase that energy or to exacerbate it or to cause more terror. But according to this gentleman, their process and their purpose was to cleanse that dark energy. So they're drawn to dark energy places where horrible things might have happened, sadness, anger, a lot of negative emotions, creating this dark energy. And they would infest those places, but their role was to consume the dark energy, to cleanse the environment. When that was all consumed, they were said to leave. So their presence was actually regarded very beneficially in that light. And I think First Nations wisdoms are incredibly profound and offer us a whole different insight into, this strange and unusual stuff. The First Nations are incredibly spiritually minded, at least with their shamanistic traditions, and they bring new understandings to this stuff and so much more, like cryptozoology and several other aspects. So I think that that's a great take, and I like that idea. I can't say that I know for sure that that's right, but I think it's a great possibility that they're performing a very good function to clear negative energies. So I think that's interesting. So that's shadow people. That's another type of spiritual entity that people experience that often gets described as ghosts. Now, another one is kind of a blanket of many things, but I'm just outlining it as other dark or evil entities, such as demons, devils, imps, or the like. And there's, in the paranormal, the word demon gets used almost to epidemic levels. And I don't think, first of all, and I've said this on several interviews and my appearances on other shows, I don't think that there are as many demons as there are claims of demons. I think that it's an incredibly overused buzzword in the paranormal, and I suspect that In a lot of cases, it's because it grabs people's attention. Do you want to hear about a ghost story? You want to hear about this demon encounter? Well, it's clickbait, kind of. I'm not suggesting there aren't demonic experiences, but I just think it's wildly overused in the paranormal. I think that, again, there are these beings out there, but I don't think they're nearly as common as is implied. And I think that's a lot of paranormal investigators or channels use it as a clickbait. It just sounds really fascinating and fantastic and terrifying, and it's this supercharged possibility. And now, I will say that I don't think, for as many people out there claim to be dealing with demons, I don't think they are, for the record, but I would say that they also should probably hope that they never have to deal with one, because these are an energy level that's so far above of your traditional haunting or poltergeist kind of thing. This is truly a nightmare fuel, honestly. Running into a true demon would be a horrifying ordeal. Now, again, I believe what you want, and I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything here, but I'm just sharing my thoughts. So those certainly are the foundation of some of these ghostly experiences. And oftentimes, before I name the rest of them that I have outlined, I just want to say you may not know what you're dealing with of any of these, but they certainly are all possibilities, and they aren't just always all former residents of a location or whatever. It could be any number of these things. Another thing that I outlined is the idea of elementals, and those are more of a, I guess, foundational spirits of this world. They weren't ever human. They aren't human. They may very well be very intelligent and able to interact, and they could be very unhappy with people depending on what's going on. Maybe people built in a very sacred space for the elemental spirits or something, and so they became enraged and haunt an area. But if you want to learn more about elementals, we can dive more into that kind of stuff in the future sometime. Just let me know via email. But I'm just going over a pretty broad list here, a pretty broad swath of things that I think are regarded as ghosts. There's other nature spirits from legends and cultures around the world, like things like sylphs and dryads and other things like that. And so they could certainly become upset with people and cause problems as well and create haunting experiences. I realize that a lot of those kind of ideas are kind of regarded pretty heavily as folklore or some other ancient religious idea. But again, I don't think that's because possibly these old religions and stuff mention these things that suddenly they're null and void because we have new understanding in sciences now. I think that there's truth to these things, and it's important to at least regard them. The other possibility, and this is one that kind of, I think it's disturbing a little bit, is transdimensional entities. And that's a really hard term to define. However, I think if you just regard it as they may have the ability to have a foot in more than one world. They may not be exclusively from here, but they may be aware of here. And they may actually be from somewhere else. And so as they're in our experience, they exist more, maybe in a more energetic form than a solid physical form. I will say this, and I realize you got to regard a lot of what you see with a grain of salt when you're looking at videos and claims of capturing things. But there's one thing that I consistently have seen through many different videos online, and I kind of believe that at least a few of these might be legitimate of the thousands that I've seen. But they seem to make captures of these beings peeking around the corners, and they almost look similar to a gray alien. And any of you that are familiar with a lot of online videos, you may know what I'm talking about. But they don't have the big bulbous head, but they seem to have a very similar build as is described with gray aliens, in that they're very wiry and they don't appear to be wearing clothes or whatever, but they're they have these really large bulbous eyes, but their heads look almost narrow and tall. And you see them in several representations online. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know that it's true, and I don't know that it's not a hoax. But if it is true, could that be representing these other entities? They don't appear like people, although they appear humanoid. And is that just their physiology, that they can become somewhat tangible enough to be seen, and then they peek around a corner and then dart back? But you catch those eyes, those weird faces, and it's like, well, that doesn't look like people. That doesn't look like a human being to me. So again, this is just me throwing around ideas, but I think that could very well be a possibility. Another one that I think is fascinating, and I think that this could potentially be the result of a lot of hauntings, and I'll get into this a little bit too. And this is something, actually the term was introduced to me by Amy Bruni when I interviewed her recently on a show on the podcast. She brought up the term egregores, and I was like, huh. And so I looked into the term, and essentially an egregore is a pretty interesting phenomena. And I like this idea because it does seem to explain a lot of things, which I'll get into in a second here. But an egregore, let me just first read the definition for you so you understand what is an egregore. The definition is, an egregore is a concept in Western esotericism and occultism that refers to a non-physical entity or thought form that is created by the shared beliefs, emotions, intentions, and worship of a group of people. The word comes from the ancient Greek word egregoros, which means wakeful. Now, interestingly enough, we see this demonstrated a lot of times in the paranormal field, in a lot of research. Take, for instance, Myrtle's Plantation, and this is another thing that Amy and I discussed when she was on the show, and she talked about how, with Myrtle's Plantation, basically all of the stories that they talk about having happened at this place are almost certainly either impossible to research or they're almost certainly not true. But what occurs to me is that enough people go into a place expecting something to be there, that perhaps through that combined idealism and expectation that they have created egregores in this location. And those egregores may be modeling their behavior off of these expectations. Now, that seems kind of wild, and the next one is very similar to this, so I'll save that part, my next part, for after I read the next possible ghost source. But the idea that people can go in and create things, I think, is very real and very probable. Not exclusively. I do think that there's any number of these things that I'm talking about is a very real phenomena in my eyes. So I'm not discounting and saying, well, all hauntings are egregores. I don't believe that, but I do believe that that can be the source of some of them. That could be a source of some of the ghostly presences, that enough people come in and they leave, they come in with their anxiety, their supercharged emotion, they come in with their excitement and with their fear and this imprint of what they're expecting. And possibly by virtue of enough people coming in and leaving those little pieces of their energy behind, that it becomes something of its own. So I think that's very profound. And I do think that happens quite a bit. I mean, every hotel has the jilted bride, and they got legends and stories to tell you about it. And every bridge has the distraught mother tossing her baby into the water, and there's a crying baby at the bridge. And so could these be egregores that have become something because of the expectation of people that there is something? Are the people manifesting the phenomena? So I think that's a pretty incredible and profound thing. So let's get on to the next one in my list of fun here. And this one is called a tulpa. And the definition and understanding of what a tulpa is it actually comes from Tibetan mysticism. And it's got its roots in the idea that you create an entity through a form of meditation and visualization called, what did they call it in that article? It was like tulpa mysticism or something like that. And basically the idea is that people can create a consciousness through meditation and visualization, intense meditation and visualization. And it can take on a life of its own. Now, usually tulpas exist in the mind of the creator, but is it possible that they could be projected into the world itself and take on a life of their own, much like the egregores? And I think that they can. I think that that's, thought forms are something that, which is usually an example of tulpas, as I've heard it referenced before, a thought form or a tulpa. So is that possible? Now, interestingly enough, I think that a tulpa could be basically what a lot of poltergeist situations are. Again, a lot of poltergeist activity is attributed to a living person, that it's a projection from them. And I find that fascinating. And again, people could be creating hauntings themselves through expectation, through fear, through projection of those things onto their environment, that it takes on a life of its own. So it's a pretty profound and unusual idea. But is it impossible? I don't think so. I think that we are profoundly active in manifesting our worlds and our experiences. And I know that most people regard that as, as far as keep a positive outlook and, the world will seem a lot happier. Well, I think it's more profound than that, though, too. I think that we very fundamentally influence our environments and what happens in our experience, whether consciously or subconsciously. And I think that, we really can shape our lives. Not that I've been exceptional at that myself, but, it's something I truly do believe in. So the definition of a tulpa is a being or thought form that is created through visualization techniques and intense concentration. The term is used in Tibetan Buddhism and other mystical and paranormal traditions, and it's often associated with a human form. Modern practitioners known as tulpamancers, that's the word I was looking for, tulpamancers, consider tulpas to be sentient, autonomous, imaginary friends with their own distinct personalities, thoughts, and emotions. Tulpamancers believe that tulpas can coexist with mental health, happiness, and optimal functionality. Through visualization practices, tulpamancers may even be able to see, hear, or touch their tulpas. So there you go. I think that could be some of the most profound hauntings could just be tulpa manifestations. And again, I'm not implying that the rest of it's a bunch of bunk and it's all this, but I do think that all of these things need to be considered. Now, here's another one, and this one might be a little more controversial in the eyes of many of you. But I gotta tell you, the parallels that I see between these two seemingly very disparate phenomena are incredible. Extraterrestrial activity is what I'm talking about. Now, if you've looked into extraterrestrial visitations and even abductions, sometimes those are incredibly synonymous with hauntings and potential possessions. In fact, I just had Ron Felber on the podcast recently, where we discussed two of his books. One dealt with, it was the Mojave incident, which dealt with an abduction situation. And then the more recent book that he wrote, The Unwelcome, The Curious Case of Clara Fowler, and the incredible similarities between the experiences of these two very different people, separated by 100 years of time. Because the Curious Case of Clara Fowler case happened at the turn of the 20th century. So it was right around 1890s into the 1900s. And the Mojave incident, I believe, happened in the 1990s. So, but the similarities that these two very different phenomena explained in their experiences were incredibly parallel to each other, almost interchangeably. So it's incredible to me, and this is a realization that came to me years ago, but it's like, as I was reading alien visitation and abduction scenarios on the shows, I was like, my God, that sounds like a haunting. That sounds like exactly what people experience in hauntings. So is it possible that it's a misidentification of phenomena? Sure. If it doesn't go as far as an abduction, they may never know that they were dealing with aliens or spirits, just because the phenomena is almost interchangeable. So I realize that sounds bizarre to some of you, but if you really dive into these two topics and if you really look at the experiences of alien encounters, it really does sound incredibly spiritual, like a haunting. It's just incredible. So interestingly enough, I think that that's a profound possibility as well. Another idea that could be the source of ghosts is time anomalies. This one is interesting to me because many times throughout the years of doing this show, and I've been doing it for 8 years now, I've covered these time anomalies, these time slips that people experience. Now, there's one street in where is it? Liverpool, England. And it has several experiences of people going into this one specific street, this one shopping area of Liverpool, and suddenly finding themselves back in the 1950s or potentially earlier. The storefronts have changed, the cars change, the people change, and they're there going, what the hell just happened? I don't know what's going on. And it's an incredibly unnerving experience for these people, but a bookstore will turn into a flower shop, I think was one of them. It was a bookstore and a flower shop in this experience. So the person was going to the bookstore to meet his girlfriend and suddenly found himself walking into a flower shop at that same location and was blown away by this old decorating and how all looked around and everything had changed. And then, I think took a step backwards or something and finally found themselves back at the bookstore in the time where they were. So these incredible experiences. Now, in many cases, there have been experiences where, in this one case, this person owned this old farmhouse, and he went into the basement because he heard this noise down in his basement. He's like, what the hell's that? So he goes down in the basement, turns the corner at the bottom of the basement, which is kind of a shop/storage area. And there facing him is this pale, translucent person who's looking at him at the bottom of the stairs with a look of absolute terror on his face, dressed in these old clothes. And the guy looks at this apparition with absolute terror as well. So it was like they were almost both ghosts to each other. And I think that that's fascinating. That would be a time slip, becoming at least partially aware or partially merged with another timeline and being able to perceive each other. Now, there's been several cases of this coming up. I think I was talking to Mike Rickensecker, who was talking about, was it the Conjuring House? Where it was the Perrin family. And he said that Mrs. Perrin, I guess, came down to the kitchen, but the kitchen had transformed where there was suddenly an old fireplace. And sitting out in front of this old fireplace was a group of 3 men looking towards the fire. And then one of them looked back and saw her and poked the other one and pointed back and said, will you look at this? And then boom, it was back in the normal time. So that was like a time slip as well. They both were aware of each other for that brief moment. But then whatever was going on that made that time fluid suddenly closed. And maybe that was having to do with their awareness, the state of being shocked or whatever. That's a whole nother show. But these accounts like this, I think, are incredibly powerful because they demonstrate that, maybe time is much more fluid than we think. Maybe there are these possible portals or diaphragms between timelines that sometimes merge, and they give us these windows and offer us a glimpse into a different time and a different era, and then they close up again. So take that as you will. Again, it's just an idea. Now, there's another idea that I have about these ghostly entities, and I don't know what to classify these as. Could be any of the former, I guess, but they're mimics. I call them mimics. And they may not be human at all, but I think they may pretend to be human. In other words, they might be a transdimensional entity, but that can change our perception of it, and it'll appear like an old-time person, or it'll appear like the famous figure that you're there to look for at a haunted location. Like, oh, Mr. Smith, we've heard that this was your beautiful home and you did a wonderful job, and then suddenly, Mr. Smith is interacting with you. Well, it might not be Mr. Smith. And mimics could also possibly show up as doppelgangers, which we hear a lot about in paranormal, these apparitions that appear like someone in your family, except you come to find out that the person in your family is either not home or is in a different part of the house entirely that they couldn't have gotten to when you saw this representation of them. So I think that that's more of a mischievous kind of thing. But again, it's anybody's guess, because some people say that seeing a doppelganger is a harbinger of bad things, maybe an upcoming death or whatever. And I don't know what to do with the superstitions like that. I don't generally tend to buy into superstitious beliefs, but I do think that something is being represented that seems like a very profound phenomenon. And I think it's something that can mimic. It can look like people in your family, or it can look like you. Sometimes you come to see yourself, apparently. And I imagine that's got to be just a little bit terrifying. But anyway, it's hard to say. So again, I wanted to dive a little bit into the sources of the activity, because everybody's always looking for a reason or a cause. And generally speaking, it's anybody's guess why there's activity there. There seems to be some fundamental solid ideas that I think can be true. I don't mean to cast doubt or disparaging statements at any of it, but it's all worth considering. A lot of times people say, well, there's got to be, a history. There's got to be a history. Certainly people must have died here, or, some tragic event must have happened here. And you look, and maybe that's true. Maybe there was a lot, like families that lived in the house for generations, and several family members died in that house. And so, it's got a profound history. And so that makes sense that in some locations that can be incredible. But sometimes the house is new, brand new. Well, that doesn't sound like there was a profound activity. Now, it is possible that the land itself is the root of the haunting, and then the presences can just become part of the home after it's built. But anyway, it could be living in a place of former tragedy. Like maybe your house is on a location that was a former battlefield or something, or maybe it was the location where a lot of people, like a tribe, had died of some kind of epidemic or something like that. So that certainly could cause some restless spirits and cause hauntings. Another idea is that they could be an energetically profound place. A place where potentially like ley lines could be, or a convergence of ley lines coming together, like the horizontal and the latitude, longitudinal ley lines might be at a convergence there, and that might make a real energetic superstorm, so to speak, for activity to happen. So that's always a consideration as well. Another idea is there are in the First Nations, there were a lot of sacred sites across America that were regarded as with the tribes as very sacred locations. They were holy places, or they were places where there was strange magic and they knew to stay out of. But, along comes us and we're like, hey, that's a great view. Let's put our house there, without any regard to that history. And so it's possible that is, again, another energetic location for different reasons, but that could certainly be an impetus for hauntings or other activity to start up as a result. So sacred sites is certainly one that we don't really explore a lot with our Western thinking, but it is something that should be regarded when looking into why are we dealing with a haunting. Another one is formerly living human ghosts may be present due to a number of factors. Strong bond to families, strong love for a home and its memories, trauma, confusion, not knowing that they died, or unresolved issues, the big unresolved issues, which always comes up in haunting stories. Well, they couldn't move on. They got unresolved issues. And that could be true. It's anybody's guess, but it may be keeping them from transitioning. I think that some of these presences have transitioned but can come back. They choose to be right there with their family or in a home that they loved, like it was a special place to them. So any number of possibilities. The strangest ones to me are the one-off encounters. And these are encounters where people have lived in a house for years. Never had anything weird happen ever. Suddenly one night, things just go absolutely wacky. And they're like, oh my God, what's going on? What is going on in our house? So the event happens. It's incredibly profound, scary, terrifying, and then it's over and never happens again. These are one-off encounters, and those are more unusual. And I've pondered those a lot, like what's going on in those situations. And I honestly believe we oftentimes consider that spirits are anchored somewhere, that they're attached to a location or place. But perhaps these are transitory spirits that aren't really anchored to a place. They're more anchored to the plane, but not the place. So maybe they can just wander through and just go, hey, let's go over there, hold my beer, watch this, that kind of thing. It's hard to say, but I do believe that there's potentially transitory entities that just wander through, will raise some hell, and then move along. So considering that kind of idea is maybe fair enough. Living on or near a location where tragedy has occurred, such as near historical battlefields, that could certainly be an impetus for paranormal activity, sites of accidents, fires, diseases, as we covered before. So locations and history of locations, again, can be a pretty powerful cause for some strange activity. Sometimes, though, these things can be introduced to houses. And I think this is pretty fascinating, but I do believe that objects can have attachments. And I think Zach Baggins has created kind of an empire on that idea by having his haunted museum, these items that for some reason seem to carry some kind of an imprint on them. And I think that's a very real thing. I think that items can have imprints and can probably introduce activity into a place. So if you happen to live in one of those places, it's like, God, where did this haunting just come from? What's all this strange crap that's happening? And then you got to think, wait, when I went to that thrift sale, I picked up that old desk. Well, that might have an imprint on it. So if you've noticed something like that happening, you're like, where'd this come from? Backtrack a little bit and think about what you've brought into the house. And if you've been antiquing or yard saling or whatever, where you picked up some stuff, or thrift shopping, all of these things could potentially have imprints, because a lot of times they come from estates that, people have passed away on, and they just get rid of the stuff because they're going to put the house on the market. Well, you might have picked up something that was very near and dear to somebody, and they don't like you having it. So you can try to remove those items and see if the activity dies down. Put the desk, or if it was a desk, put the desk in a garage. See if the activity in the house dies down. And if it does, then there's ways to cleanse things like that you need to look into. I'm not going to give any recipes for that because it's very individual and it matters a lot, your spirituality. So that's very fundamental in cleansing things and having it mean something. So I'll leave that up to you. There's plenty of resources online to look into cleansing items and things that line up with your spirituality. So again, experiencing time anomalies is a possibility, and there's no clear reason why these things might happen, but many reports of shock two-way encounters with the past have been documented. So those are all reasons that maybe the activity is present, and it could be any or all, or it could be a whole other reason that I haven't outlined here. But again, I just want to say, full disclosure, these thoughts are the culmination of talking to hundreds of experiencers throughout the years and covering thousands of encounter stories. And I just felt it was important to discuss, as it's clear to me that we're not dealing with one phenomena with ghosts in these cases, but one of many different possibilities. So I just thought it'd be interesting to discuss. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you found it informative and maybe took some value from it. It's a new direction for the show. It's just something we're going to do here and there as I have the time to sit down and outline some thoughts about each of these phenomena. But I figured ghost was one I think we all can understand and relate to, and hopefully you found some value in all of this. But at the end of the day, you be the judge. I don't pretend to try to impress my beliefs upon anybody. These are just my own musings and my own thoughts and considerations. So if they mean something to you, great. If not, well, thanks for joining me anyway. But I hope you guys enjoyed this again. As always, thank you for all the love and support. And I'll talk to you again next time. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for us today. So hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thank you again so much for all your love and support. And remember, if you want to follow the Paranormal Portal, probably the easiest way is to head over to paranormalportal.net. And that's the homepage for the Paranormal Portal. And you'll find links to all of our different social media and sites and information about the shows, including our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/paranormalportal. Or just look for Paranormal Portal on Google or whatever search engine, and you'll find links to our social media such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. So we're kind of all over the place, and we're spreading as well as we can. But anyway, thank you so much for the love and support. Y'all take care, and remember, we love y'all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other, help each other out, find the magic in every day, and remember to laugh as much as you can. Until next time.